Hello, everybody. I'm Joanna Wheeldin. I'm a Freedomista, and welcome to Freedom Festival 2025. We are so glad that you're here. Welcome back to all of those who've attended the festival before. And if this is your first time, a little introduction. Freedom Festival was started in 2023 in response to the desire to create through celebration, conversation, and play. We explore what freedom means to our communities and celebrate guaranteed emancipation and independence. In the US, that's from Juneteenth to the 4th of July, 16 days. This celebration is created by ordinary people, among them artists, scientists, organizers, enthusiasts, and change makers, giving and inviting others to explore what freedom and independence means to them. We hope you'll take a moment to look at our website, freedomfestivalusa.org, to see our exciting roster of 22 events, both virtual and in person. Sign up for the festival newsletter so that we can keep you up to date on all the festival happenings. Again, welcome. We hope you enjoy this session. We're particularly excited to have you attend this event, organized and hosted by myself, Joanna Wheeldin. Today I'm joined by our guest, Santa Rosa Junior College philosophy instructors Sean Martin and Dr. Alexa Forrester to explore the philosophy of freedom. Freedom is a constant conversation. For most of history, those conversations were ephemeral, ideas exchanged without a trace. I imagine conversations about freedom taking place through whispers in the dark before bed or out in the open on a park bench where the wind carries the words away. We can access ideas about freedom through written work, but conversations about freedom are a whole nother ballgame. Today, we'll capture and record this particular conversation about freedom. We don't aim to find the perfect definition for it. We aim to explore and connect about what these ideas mean to us, combining our personal experiences with written work that we connect to. And you can check out the description of this video to access the texts that we'll be referencing. So here's a roadmap for today. I'll pose a question to our group, and I'll begin by inviting Sean or Alexa to answer the question. And after each of us have answered, we'll open the question up to the audience, and you are welcome to join the conversation if you'd like, but it's also completely okay just to observe. And we'll spend about an hour to an hour and a half today on these wonderful topics. So before I pose our first question, let's do some introductions, and we'll begin with Alexa. Please tell us where you're coming to us from and share as much about yourself as you'd like.
Hey everybody, it is so good to be here with you. My name is Alexa and I'm coming from Santa Rosa, California. And I teach at Santa Rosa Junior College and I spend a lot of my time on that, a lot of my time being a mother, and then any extra time I have, I do community organizing around transportation justice, which sort of found my way into about 5 years ago and have been going strong since. So that's me, Sean.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sean Martin. I also teach at Santa Rosa JC, and thank you so much for having me here, inviting me, Joanna. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to all of you who've joined us. I see Ava and Raquel just joined us recently, so welcome. Um, I'm a philosopher. By profession, but I'm also a curious person. Most of my academic work has been in the area of political economy, where my main interest is in the nexus between economic issues and political issues and the individual and their relationship to the state. But in recent decades, I've been really interested in nonviolence, the history and the philosophy of nonviolence. And so I've spent a lot of time studying that and its relationship to revolution and liberation. And one of the things that we'll be talking about today, hopefully, in relationship to freedom. I just want to say first, I'm mindful that this is a celebration of Juneteenth, and being a white affluent male, I just want to be recognized that from that position, I just want to express myself in full humility. One of the things about the history of nonviolence is, of course, that um, the most successful and most impressive instances of liberation have been of people liberating themselves. And this is an important aspect of freedom. It's something we do. It's not something that's given to us. It's not something that's decreed by law. It's an activity. And so I really appreciate your opening comments, Joanna, both about the difficulty of defining such a term, but also insofar as we do describe it, it's something we're actively engaged in. It's not something that happens to us. I guess
Absolutely.
that's it. That was more of a statement than an introduction. My apologies.
No, it's all welcome. It's all part of the conversation. A little bit about me. I'm currently an art student at Sonoma State. Philosophy is a personal passion of mine. I've always I've always had an activist bent to me, and nothing makes me happier than reading some really good material and chatting about it with anybody that'll talk to me about it. So, um, Ava and Rochelle, you are welcome to give us an introduction of where you're coming from, and we'd love to say hi.
Hi, it's nice to see all of you, some familiar and some new faces. Thank you for putting this together. I really appreciated all what you said, and my name is Ava Grail, and I'm coming to you from Sebastopol, California right now. And I'm a mother and a grandmother, and have lived on the fringes of society because I wanted more freedom. And I have, been involved in various activist movements over the years, and then been mostly occupied with survival issues of just maintaining life, which I know, is a big part of what we have to do,
Mhm.
which also kind of feeds into the conversation, I guess. But yeah, I'm I'm so curious, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. Rochelle, so good to see
Uh,
you.
Thank you, Joanne. I had to find my way back to Zoom somehow. It went somewhere. Um, I am located in Atlanta, Georgia, where I've been since 1986. I guess I could call it home now. I'm an Army brat, so I always moved every 2 or 3 years from birth on till about college. So I don't really identify with geography that much. But Atlanta, I kind of identify with, and I love it. Um, I love the title Philosophy of Freedom. I'm very curious and wondering about philosophy of freedom. Never really thought of it, so it's exciting to me to even think of it that way. Um, and I'm not even sure how I would discuss it because I'm not even sure what it is, since I don't believe it is yet. I mean, I think Sean said it for me. It's something that we are doing, um, not something that we've arrived at or something. I don't think we can thingify it. I do think it's activity with people together. Um, so maybe it isn't a thing where we put a period, that we have it, boom, end of story. So I liked how Sean, made it a moving kind of thing, and I'm really encouraged by this group and eager to hear what people have to say about it, because I don't think I've been in a conversation dedicated to the philosophy of freedom before. So this is unique for me. So thank you.
So excited to have you.
Thank you.
So, Raquel Holmes, Katati. I love how Sonoma County and Atlanta we are. Um, and I was thinking, just where philosophy in the hands of ordinary people. So again, like getting us out of the ivory tower or our bubbles, of being able to ask big questions of little things in a way that puts our lives and what we can create in our hands. So there's something about, like, I think of the words of practical philosophy, and that asking questions, there's, when I went to get a PhD, in sciences, the scientist saying to me, well, you know that the PH is for philosophy and asking questions, right? And yet in the sciences, we can get into the very particular tools that we use. So I am really interested in hearing, thinking, talking of what do we mean when we're saying freedom, and how does that live in our lives practically. So I'm really glad for this to be what it is already and what it will become. Oh, thank you.
Amazing, amazing. And so with that, we'll start off with our first question. I'll pose it to Alexa, and while Alexa and Sean answer, everybody else, you're welcome to think about an answer you might like to say, but you're again totally welcome just to observe. And this one is going to be basic, but it's going to be deep, and it's going to be, what does freedom mean to you, Alexa?
This seems like such an impossible question. So I'm gonna, if it's not too annoying for me to just read a quote, and this quote is in the Google Doc that I sent. And so if you want to actually read the quote yourself, that's available there. This is a recent book called On Freedom by Timothy Snyder, who also wrote on tyranny and other books. So he writes, a life, a right to life begins with knowledge. What life is, how life works, how life is possible on this earth. If we neglect that knowledge, we cease to be. We are vulnerable to nature and to those who wish to manipulate and harm us. Yet if we gain and apply knowledge about the energy of life, we can not only avoid the worst, but ensure the best. Our universe neither makes us free nor prevents us from being free. It leaves open a realm of what should be, a law of freedom that allows our endless combinations of virtues. Its constraints become our capacities if we understand them and apply our knowledge with purpose. So to me, I think that was this idea of being situated so that you can apply the knowledge you have of how things work with purpose and in line with your values is a pretty good encapsulation of what freedom means. And I recently have been sort of on this quest to understand the connection between disinformation and autocracy. And it's become even more apparent to me as our scientific. I definitely see philosophy as contiguous with science. It's just that philosophers spend more time on the questions that scientists don't quite know yet how to answer, but it's all part of the same project to understand ourselves in the world. And watching our right to do that come under attack has really, it's not a battle I expected to fight in my professional life. When I was planning to become a philosopher, I just like, everybody respects the academy and everybody knows knowledge is important. And now I feel like, oh wait, this whole project is under attack, like the whole thing of it. And so I really appreciate Timothy Snyder putting those, those words into place to help more my understanding of the connection between knowledge and freedom.
Thank you.
Well, I'll try my best to follow that up. So much of what's been said already really resonates with my own sense of the meaning of freedom. I guess I'd begin with saying freedom means a lot of different things. There's just a host of senses of the term, and some of them are even maybe even in tension, if not contradiction, with each other. So I'll try to prevent my comments being overly didactic or anything, because it's just my habits as an instructor is sometimes just to really lay things out. One of the primary functions of philosophy is conceptual analysis. So we look at concepts, terms, keywords that are important to us. And then we try to understand them in all the various contexts in which they emerge. And I guess I'd go back to one of the things Joanna said at the very beginning, that to define a concept like freedom, if you look at the etymology of the term, or the historical meaning of the term defined, it's really to end, to kill, to destroy. I mean, to confine. And I don't think freedom is something that really can be defined in that way. It's not. There's not a, I guess, to employ a common philosophical phrase. It's not a Platonic form. It doesn't have an essential meaning that pervades all other meanings of the term. Um, there's two kind of branches of the discussion of freedom that philosophers often discuss, and one of them I don't think we're really going to deal with today, but I thought I'd just mention it up front since there might be some listeners that are curious about it. The metaphysical exploration of freedom asks about our being, the ontology. There I am using another term. The nature of ourselves. Are we free in the sense that we escape some of the implications of a deterministic universe? So referring to the sciences, one of the important concepts used in the sciences is cause and effect, and the presumption that any event must have some explanation, and that explanation would explain, the event. And so the notion of causal determinism is just super important in the sciences, and it drives much of the research. We need to, understand why things happen and how they occur and so forth. And then there are, a whole host of opinions about whether or not people somehow escape that universal network of causation or not. That's not really what I'm interested in talking about today, and I presume that's not the sort of thing we're going to discuss, because we wouldn't settle it, and there's libraries full of ideas about that stuff. So yeah, I think as I can't remember if it was Rochelle or Raquel who brought this up, but the practical considerations of freedom, I think, is what we're looking at today, and especially their social implications. And on that, I have just a bunch of different ideas. There was a classic work by Isaiah Berlin. Gosh, it's getting close to 100 years ago. He's an important philosopher and a liberal contributor to political theory, and he distinguished between positive liberty and negative liberty. And negative liberty is probably something most of us are most familiar with. It's a dominant concept in liberal democratic constitutional societies, and it's defined largely as a freedom from coercion. So if you read the Declaration of Independence or other landmark articles expressing the need of people to be free, what they mean is to be free from coercive, oppressive, dominating forces. And of course, a lot of the features relevant to Juneteenth, come in there. It's a freedom to pursue one's projects. Alexa's quote from Timothy Snyder talks about this. We project ourselves into the future. A project is something we aim to achieve, right? It's something we can try to do, and so the freedom to pursue one's own projects, non-interference in that, to move, and there's the transportation edge, but not just move in the terms of physical space, but also mentally, right? So this is where creativity and curiosity are just essential concepts linked with freedom in my mind. And please stop me anytime. I could go on forever. Positive liberty or positive freedom, in Berlin's account, is more related to the sorts of freedom you find this discussed at length in the ancient writings. Folks like Plato and the Stoics and others talk about being free from our aspects of ourselves, our passions, our desires, our appetites, and such. To be liberated from urges or the kind of internal forces, but also, from those elements of our society that tempt us into becoming enslaved, to use the term that is often employed in those writings, by elements of ourselves that can easily consume us. And in this era of, I don't know, consumerism and opioid addiction and so forth, that could be that's a very personal sense of freedom. We need to be able to overcome these elements of ourselves, and the Buddhist tradition, focuses on this really kind of poignantly when they talk about freedom as a detachment from our desires or our commitments and our egos, essentially. Um, I've been spending the last year studying a Spanish philosopher, Miguel de Unamuno, who's one of the early 20th century proponents of a philosophical trend called existentialism, and in existentialist circles, sometimes freedom is described as transcendence. Again, it's a projection uh, of meaning onto the world. The world is a fact, it's a thing. What does it mean? We may not be able to change the natural facts of the world, but we can ascribe meaning to them in such a way that conforms with our purposes and goals. And so I think of freedom a lot as our ability, our creative inventiveness, our ability to ascribe meaning to the world. And finally, I just want to talk about freedom as a social phenomenon. In my studies of nonviolence, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and Ella Baker and other prominent figures loom large on my mind. And there's a concept, and this runs through the theory of freedom in nonviolence, um, where we think about peace in different ways. And of course, there's a notion of a negative peace, which is just an absence of violence. And of course, everybody wants to be free from violence, but is that enough? And a king, of course, proposes that, no, what we ought to strive for is a positive peace, and that's a positive peace, as he coins the term, is related to the structural and cultural norms of a society. And we're all social beings. And unless those cultural institutions, those structural features of society, uh, really facilitate the ability of people to fulfill their full potential, then we're not living really in a peaceful world. We're living in a negative peace. And the term he uses is the beloved community. We ought to see everybody, ourselves included, as ends, as beings with purpose and goals and aspirations of our own. And those goals typically, at least the most noble of them, uh, uh, involve our situatedness in a society, right? And so society ought to provide people with the resources, the capacities. And as an educator, of course, I see education as an important element of that, in order to really fulfill their purposes, their goals, their projects. And so, you know, there's another sort of freedom that can really be aligned with apathy or, avoidance of conflict, to be free from the awkward feelings. And I guess what I've come to believe is that, really, freedom is better found in situations where people are willing to confront conflict directly, to express themselves and stubbornly refuse to be made an object or a thing or a means for the purposes of others. And
Yes.
so that's kind of my ultimate sense of freedom, is that, yeah, as a social idea, it's a place where people can pursue in community, with mutual regard, respect, recognition, as ends in themselves.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to hear that you brought up this idea of the free from, because I have some modern um, interpretations of the free from that uh, when I think about what freedom means to me. When I think about defining freedom, I imagine trying to wrap fabric around some sort of liquid, and as soon as you've got the corners met together, the freedom just comes right out, and it just takes up space, and it's this thing that once you try to define it, it says, nope, I'm gonna actually take this new shape. And today, I think we're all bringing up amazing points about freedom on an individual level, freedom on a social level, and these are all some really great topics that we can get into. For me, I find that on the individual level, that fashion is my ultimate manifestation of personal autonomy, and I have complete control of how I present. And so to me, fashion is freedom that's free from conformity and free from shame. And to me, also, freedom is reading literature that's both free from censorship and free from language which constricts um, reality to distort it and to represent reality in an unjust way. And so, in a way, freedom is also free from ignorance. And in kind of a social level, to me, freedom is also the ability to actually make mistakes and to have the space to grow from those mistakes and to explore ideas and be wrong. Um, and it's also the ability to express your full emotional spectrum as a person without judgment. And so I'm so glad that you're bringing up the kind of person who brought up this free from thing, because I really thought I was onto something. I was like, oh, I've got it. I've come up with But of course, that's the thing. We've been talking about these ideas for years and years and years. So of course we're bound to come up on some patterns of what freedom might mean. So, okay, wonderful. Is there anyone in our lovely audience who'd like to share what freedom means to them? Please go ahead, Ava.
This conversation is so moving. There's been a few times where I've had to like keep from bursting into tears. There's so much here. And it's hard for my brain to like go back to each person and what you've said, but I just want you to know thank you so much for everything that you gave. The thing that really comes up for me is freedom of religion, freedom from religion. I was raised in a really strict kind of Christian thing, and it also very patriarchal. And I'm 66 now. It has taken a lifetime to even see the constructs around me. And I feel like I'm so happy to be in this conversation and to know that this is something that we're doing now. Um, it's yeah, to be free to choose one's relationship with life, within reason of, I can think, not harming other people is kind of the boundary, I guess. So, but within that, to be able to be supported to pursue what our heart leads us to, and not have to struggle. And well, there's people here who know all about a lifetime of struggle. And I think that, we're just continuing on to try to come back to being human beings. I think that's what the common thread here is, like, to carve a space for us to really be human beings again. And I think that's what Native Americans have been talking about for so long, just to be able to be free to be who they are, and to not be, and to be free from oppression, free from constant, yeah, whatever this thing is, however it got created. It's time to focus on uncreating it. So, yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ava.
Yeah, I am also very appreciative of how we've opened up some ways of seeing freedom, freedom to, freedom from, freedom for. I keep thinking about point of view in this conversation. I just think freedom means so many different things depending on where we are located culturally, politically, class, whatever, gender. Um, and it almost makes it impossible for me to understand any conversation about freedom given where people are coming from to even have the conversation. Like when Sean mentioned privileged white male, um, I don't know that position. I mean, I could guess, but I don't experience that point of view. Um, and as a Black person, I don't experience the point of view of every Black person either. Um, and as a woman, every woman. So it seems like it's an individualized kind of experience. And yet, historically, it's a collective experience. I find freedom, what is it? Fighting for freedom comes up a lot. That feels like an oxymoron to me in a way,
Mhm.
like military intelligence or happily married or whatever. It just doesn't, it's a contradiction to fight for something that we have by birth. I mean, we're free. Um, and it's who says, I mean, who decides? Do I get to decide my freedom, or is it somehow other decided?
Mhm.
I mean, it's not been that long ago that um, I was in a department store with two friends. This is when I was in college, so that was like yesterday. And the two friends were Caucasian, and they asked me to just kind of um, stand in certain places and walk and whatnot. And that's when I learned about the store detectives and who they were going to follow. And my friends who were going to steal a few things, and they were wealthy kids. Their parents were wealthy. This was just like a lark for them. The detectives were following me around the store while my two white male friends were stealing albums. So that when we left the store, I mean, I didn't even notice this. We got back to the car. Each of them had like 5 or 10 albums. This is when albums were, uh, and they asked me which ones I wanted. I mean, it was just like fun. And they weren't hardly going to be caught. If anybody was going to be caught doing anything, it was me. Now, I don't think that would happen to Ava in a department store. I don't know. It might. But it's that kind of experience that's not unique in my life. That when I walk in a room, I've already lost whatever percentage of freedom there is that, say, Ava or Alexa might have. I don't have it even now. Um, and so the fighting for it fits me because that's been kind of a lifetime activity. And to join with others to collectively do this, because I don't think it can be done by any small group or individual. Um, I just think it's a heavy lifting effort and commitment. And I don't know, it's an ongoing thing. And I think it depends on who you ask. That's
Absolutely.
comma.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. And it's because it depends on who we ask that it's important that all of us have this conversation together because while it does mean different things to all of us, there are some patterns and we do share some of the meaning. And so thank you so much for raising some questions yourself, because that is what we do here in philosophy. And thanks for telling us about your experience.
You're welcome.
It made me think of the question of consequence, which might be a different question of freedom. Like, what are we free to do? What are we able to do? What are the constraints that exist? And I appreciate you, Joanna, bringing back, like, we do, like, that's part of the Freedom Festivals. Like, we all have different understandings of what freedom is in some moment, and of that relationship. So what's echoing to me is this, from what Sean was saying, and Alexa's, the um, for Martin Luther King, this question of nonviolence, and that we have constructs culturally that have an impingement on what we're able to do. So, like yesterday, when we were talking about artificial intelligence, Loretta Cheeks referenced Italy, where women are particularly free to go to a beach and be topless, which is not what we do in the States in terms of a cultural constraint, right? And then there's this question of, what do we know, and do we need to know in order to create the the freedoms? And one of the part of the quote, which is in from Timothy Snyder, that I like, is, and goes with what Rochelle was just saying, is, but we will not get to it in isolation or by deduction. Freedom is positive. Getting words around it, like living it, is an action of creation. So, and it's interesting because I think we make use of things that we may know or experience, but I think creativity isn't necessarily a knowing act. Right, because there's the what will unfold, and if we have yet to experience freedom culturally or socially, then are we creating, or are we not creating into the unknown?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it this way before, Raquel, but creation seems to be this like combination of what you know. It's like both an act of knowing, but also an act of discovery. Like there are some things you know, like how to use paints or how to sew, or, but then in the process, you're discovering something as well. And um, if I can just circle back to Rochelle, what you said about the community. I actually haven't finished Timothy Snyder's On Freedom yet. I'm at the last chapter, but the last chapter is called On Solidarity. And he talks about how none of the things that support positive freedom can happen without a community that is tending to it and consciously trying to make it happen. And I really like that aspect of his writing, even though I haven't read that chapter yet. I know where he's going. So, um, and then the one other thing I wanted to point out in that second quote, which I didn't read, um, but I really like how Timothy Snyder, in the second quote that you put in the chat there, Joanna, where he says, "Your destiny is neither subjugation nor automation." I really appreciate the inclusion of automation given the AI. I missed the AI conversation yesterday. Was that recorded? I'd love to go back and watch that one.
Yes.
Uh,
YouTube Freedom Festival USA. That's the channel that will be on.
awesome. But the sort of, I think we are have learned we're educated more about subjugation as a threat to freedom and less about automation as a threat to freedom. But then he follows that with three things that humans can do: evaluate, transform, and take responsibility. And I just think those are all really interesting and deep concepts that can't be fully fleshed out here, but I think interesting and worth exploring more. And the transformation I see as part and parcel with the creativity, right?
Wow, there's so much here. I hope you don't mind me stepping in a bit. um, so much of what Rochelle and Raquel and Ava brought, just tap right into the literature that I'm kind of immersed in, and of course Timothy Snyder is part of that. Thanks for reminding us of his important work, Alexa. Just a couple of thoughts that came up in Rochelle's comments. Identity can be, of course, owned by a person, but it also can be imposed. And identity can be, in the case you described, where it was exploited by your friends who wish to purloin records. um, it can be. That's an interesting example of how sometimes it can be used against the sources of oppression, not necessarily for a positive end in that case, but it can be stifling and limiting, right? You could be categorized, like an object, and a universal or definition can be imposed upon someone that eliminates their individuality and their creative options. But it can also be this source of community and solidarity. Just to go back to that term, a common experience that folks can employ to address the sources of that limiting or stifling element. This is where Joanna's concept of opacity comes in. We part of I think there's an important element of privacy, of personal kind of um, I don't know, openness to recreate ourselves is an important part of freedom. And that's difficult to do in a context where we are either automated or oppressed, where we're constantly focused on the source of oppression. W.E.B. Du Bois talks about this concept of double consciousness, and it's kind of a superpower in one way, because he describes a person who's truly oppressed, truly subject to the vicious and violent control of others, has to understand those others even more than those others understand themselves, because they're the subjects of that oppressive force. And if you're focused constantly on what others think of you, it's really hard to focus on what you think of yourself. And so it's a burden and a superpower. That's my term. That's not Du Bois's term. But yeah, we need space to create ourselves, and sometimes that requires that we join in solidarity with others who experientially understand the condition of oppression. And to Rochelle's point, I read a lot about it. I try my best to empathize as a human being of what it might be like. One of the privileges of whiteness, of course, and again, I don't want to overplay this card or anything, but is that we kind of aren't burdened with the problem of having to address how others describe us. Not, at least not in the typical case or in the general case. Of course, there are moments when that comes up, and this is where some of the reactionary, kind of fearful pushback against efforts to change society come from. Is all of a sudden people are realizing, oh, they're being identified as white, and that's terrifying to them, because all of a sudden, now someone else is defining them, right? Okay, so that was one thing. Also, the element that Joanna you brought up with conformity and shame. I think that's super important and kind of brings us back to the relationship of violence, and oppression. Uh, uh, Shame is, I think, well understood. Gilligan writes broadly about this notion that most violence arises out of shame, out of a sense of a need to address a deeply uncomfortable feeling, um, that we often project outward to others. Sometimes people will project it inwards, and that leads to all kinds of difficulties for that person, often even leading to suicide. But yeah, shame is a oppressive force in its own right, and it's something that we carry with us, right? So we have to choose to unleash that. And just there's so many things that came up that I forgive me for seeming so scattered, but the taking responsibility part. getting back to the existentialist, I mean, one of the things philosophers often talk about is the burden of freedom. Often people are desperate to get rid of their freedom. They want to conform because it's easier, right? It's less of a struggle. They want to relieve themselves of the responsibility of having to choose. And I think that a lot of the apathy and a lot of the resistance to get involved uh, is linked to that fear of freedom. And taking responsibility is a wonderful thing. It's empowering and it helps to shape who we are, but it's also quite frightful, right? To be responsible for this world in one way or another. And in fact, some existentialists will say it is the source of our, human nature, is basically this. Sartre calls it nausea. Some people call it, a feeling of abandonment or a despair. The sense that we have to act, right? We have to do something, and whatever we do, we own it, and yet we lack the full understanding or knowledge of what that will be. Um, just one last point, and I brought up Barbara Deming. I had
I did
expected to
read
talk.
those. I read those 10 pages you shared with me. I'll link those in
uh,
the description. Yeah, that was a really great read.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things she talks about is, and this is kind of pervasive throughout the theory of nonviolence. You see it in Gandhi. Gandhi talks about destructive nonviolence. This is like bringing down the structures of oppression, resisting and opposing something. But there's also what he calls this constructive project, which you have to have a vision of what you want the world to be. And so if you're going to take responsibility for something, you may as well aim towards that something. Again, that's what King calls the beloved community. And we should have, positive goals. And those goals ought to be broad enough and universal enough that everyone from every perspective can buy into it. The most successful liberation movements always involve goals that bring in everyone. If you use violence, you need young people that can carry armaments around, and um, uh, uh, you're also tearing people away from themselves. Nobody wants to engage in something where they don't want to belong to a group that has tortured their children or deprived them of peace. Vengeance isn't the point. The point is a future, a place where we can all thrive and prosper and become who we choose to be. And often that is to be a person in a community of support and care, where we know that we're supported. And I just, anyway.
Thank you. That's a great segue to this next question, which I think will take us all the way through time. So, we've talked about freedom being this thing that we do and this thing that we create. And so I want to pose a question that helps us talk about how we can create that on our individual scale. And that question is, what's the relationship between language and freedom, and how can we intentionally use language to free ourselves as we speak? And so, Alexa, I'll pose this question to you first this time.
Okay, great. So I also wanted to talk about transportation. So I'm going to do both right here.
Amazing.
If we don't get time to dive into the transportation, I do want to recommend a book that's called Dividing Lines by Deborah Archer, who's also, I think, right now the president of ACLU, but it's all about transportation injustice. In so in my community organizing space, I have really been organizing to make it possible to live in Santa Rosa without a car. Like that is the goal. And there's a lot of pieces to that. We need active transportation infrastructure, we need public transit infrastructure, and we're way behind on all of that. So it's a tough road. But one of the things that I really learned about in that work is the autocentricity of our society and the way that automobiles, there is a parallel that I see between white supremacy and automobile supremacy, and like the ways that oppressive structures are just woven into the fabric. You don't necessarily notice them until you start to challenge them. And then when you start to challenge them, that's when you really notice them. And in turn, I'll just give you one example of a word that is used. So this is the language. When a car hits a pedestrian or a cyclist or another car, it is almost always called an accident. That's the word. If you look through newspaper articles and everything, you'll see this word accident. And there is a failure to take responsibility, right? When a car hits a pedestrian, and as happened to one of my son's classmates, he was killed, a 13-year-old was killed near my home walking to school. It was deemed an accident, right? And then that was all there was to say about it. There were no other questions to ask. There was no way to solve the problem. It was just an unfortunate fact of life, which totally ignores the fact that the streets are designed in incredibly unsafe ways. And we know this because in other places that we design streets differently, we we see much lower rates of accidents and deaths. And I have this general theory about how Americans don't value life enough, right? Like there are people who talk about a big game about being pro-life, but when you really look at our policies and our all of our decisions, it doesn't seem that way to me. And so what we have been advocating is we have some people, I work with a group called Bikeable Santa Rosa, and then I also work with the North Bay Transit Riders. Anytime there's an article and they use the word accident, we ask them to change it to crash, because that's what it is. And it's violence. It is a type of violence, like traffic violence is a type of violence. And I've learned in the process of this work too, that for instance, when a police officer shows up to do an incident report, there is not a box they can check for unsafe street design. They can blame it on the pedestrian, they can blame it on the driver, or they can call it an accident. But it's the government's fault for building a street that's so dangerous, right? And so until you have the language in place to direct people's attention to what's actually causing the source of our suffering, you won't be able to be free. And this is part of the knowledge. And it's actually what I think philosophers have to add to science, is a really careful attention to how we're using our words to describe what's happening in our communities. Yeah.
Such a fabulous answer. Thank you so much. Sean,
I'd add to that.
yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, please go ahead. Yes. What
No,
are your thoughts?
the same kind of concept applies in all kinds of context in workforce. For instance, you know, injuries and deaths that occur in the context of a factory or a firm of sorts. These are also described as, these unavoidable things or natural disasters, right? The awful fires we experienced, starting in 2017, especially, their destructive force was largely a result of poor planning. The Santa Rosa City Council knew very well that fires had, for generations. In fact, our local Miwok and Pomo community could tell us quite well that, yeah, that's the place where fires go. And there were actually prohibitions for building there that were overturned under the pressure of developers, that, ended up creating a context where a lot of destruction and suffering could occur. Also,
You open
notion,
Robert's office room.
that notion of privacy is also really fundamental here too, because the context of positive and negative liberty, again, private property is one of those concepts that often protects conditions or preserves conditions that create the kind of violence that Alexa was just describing. NIMBYism in the case of housing, access to basic needs, or other kinds of developments that might make the world more uh, uh, safe for transportation for all. Um, you know, I'm sure you come across this all the time, Alexa, that the independence afforded to those with a vehicle, I can get in my car and go in. I don't have to wait for the train schedule. I don't have to, go to the place the train goes, and that sort of thing often is confronting the commensurate notion of freedom that is won through adequate public transportation. A lot of this, does come down to language, and the euphemisms we use, like accident instead of crash, often obscure, profoundly damaging violence. I mean, militarism is filled with such terms. We don't bomb facilities filled with people. We service the target. There's collateral damage, not unnecessary killing of civilians or non-combatants. When we use sanctions, often that translates to starvation or horrible illness in entire communities. And it's very rarely discussed in that way. And so much there to talk about. The language we use is, in fact, I mean, our whole ability to conceive of options, of alternatives, is wrapped up in the language we have. And really, when we confine ourselves to these gross dichotomies, this or that, uh, and often, fight or flight is one of those, and where fight is often construed as the more empowering method, you leave out so many imaginative alternatives that could solve problems, that could get us on the same page, to build community and structures. I guess the last thing I put is education. We have this movement in our society. It's often referred to as education reform, but it's closer to what I think the term Joanna used earlier, conform, to have this kind of universal notion of what student success is, to put a number on it, to make it easily measurable, and then to align all funding sources and accountability constructs to that concept. And if success is linked purely to completion, getting a degree or a job or something like that, it really closes the door to all kinds of options and opportunities. What's an artist here talking about philosophy for? Do your art. That's your thing, right? And it's often, construed as oppressive to give people undue freedom to choose to explore the options they have. We're forcing them to take unnecessary units that inhibit their completion and such. And so we got to be really careful how we talk about the systems that we employ and the way we appraise our society, because sometimes the wrong language could lead to really terrible, often completely unintentional effects. But sometimes the nudging or the purposeful design of these things really is intended to serve the interest of others. And I'll just go out there on a limb and say the current education reform proposals that are often described as more equitable or conducive to freedom, I think it really serve the interest of employers and those who wish to use the public education system to have compliant and conforming and limited employees.
Yes. And here we are again, this individual social relationship to freedom. It's all so important to talk about. Something that has been on my mind a lot is using language intentionally and discovering when I'm observing myself speaking the ways that patriarchal language has infected my lexicon. And so, for example, we celebrate success using aggressive terms. You killed it. you destroyed that exam, you smashed your driver's test. And when we use this aggressive language to celebrate success, we're equating aggression with success, and we don't have the language to actually celebrate ourselves in a way that reflects the reality. And so I have been trying to select my words carefully when doing something as simple as congratulating another person. Um, and I think that from the point of view of someone who belongs to the LGBT community, I think that there's a very interesting conversation about language happening where there's a lot of resistance against this idea that we name the pronouns that we use. And I've been thinking about how earlier you mentioned that you mentioned, Sean, that our identity can be used against us and we can be put in this box. And I think for a long time, people in the LGBT community were described with language that was chosen by the oppressor. And there is now a shift happening where we are deciding the language that we want to describe ourselves with. And that becomes a problem because it puts tension on how we are perceived, because we don't want to be perceived in this limiting, destructive way. We want to be perceived in a way that aligns with our reality. And so I make the greatest effort that I can to respect people and to call them how they want to be called. And if they'd like to try a new name, we can play with that new name, and we can of course, if it's appropriate for, if you belong to a community that a slur has been used against you and you want to take that back and put power in it to give yourself the freedom that that word took away from you, I support using language that helps you free yourself. And so I think there is a kind of reality breaking thing that happens when you start to question, well, what is my language doing to shape my reality? And you start to really notice all of the ways that subconsciously we use language to denote patriarchal, offensive notions. I was thinking recently about how there's no female equivalent for junior and senior. You know, this is, oh, here's my kid, he's Sam Jr., but there's no female equivalent for that. And just something as simple as that helps me understand the reality that has been created and the reality that that language enforces. And so I think that artistic expression of language is very important, and I think that poetry is a medium to combat the constraints that language puts on us. Even just an act like, even as something as simple as listing random objects and reading it out loud to another person. It's a free act because um, you're not thinking how you're told to think. You're not saying what you're supposed to. You're just expressing words. As all of us, we all have this gravitation to the art of words and to the art of language. And so all of us deserve ownership of language that frees us. And so with that, I'm happy to open up this question of how can you use language to free yourself to our lovely audience.
I'm so sorry, Joanna. I
Sure.
can't help but interject. I've been reading this incredible book. I don't know if you're aware of it.
No, I haven't heard.
Srđ Popovic. He's a Serbian, one of the leaders of Optor, the resistance movement against the murderous regime of Milosevic. But he describes, nonviolent movements around the world, and he also belongs to a group called Canvas that actually offers their services to any liberation movement around the world. But one of the movements he describes is very personally poignant for me because it's really one of my earliest experiences of a liberation movement. My uncle grew up in Iowa. He was a gay man who, the second he could, he moved to San Francisco. and he lived in the Castro district through the 60s, and and like he and of course many of his friends suffered profoundly during the AIDS crisis. He did die of AIDS, and as did my brother-in-law. And the movement, the kind of story of that movement tells us a lot about how uh, uh, about the relationship of identity and its both its empowering and limiting aspects. And if you look early in the movement, folks like Harvey Milk and others who wanted to assert the legitimacy of their identity by identifying with their group had some ACT UP and other groups that were very important in the development of the movement, but had limited impact until they reached out. The campaign moved out to the families, the friends, the loved ones, and define themselves. Yes, they embrace terms like queerness and other terms that had been epithets, and this often happens in movements. But uh, when they became brothers, sisters, children, fathers, uncles, beloved members of the community. Yes, we're here, we're queer, but we're also integrated and people care about us. And when fathers and mothers were carrying signs that I love and accept my gay son, or my daughter deserves health care, it opens up, it expands and connects people in their identity to the broader community, allows for a larger integration of individuals into the group, opposing oppressive conditions. And I mean, if you go back and look, you can go on YouTube and see them, the press conferences of the Reagan administration during the AIDS crisis. It's appalling. It really is. You can't watch it without, in my case, weeping, describing people in terms that are so objectified and revolting. But when it becomes someone's grandchild or someone's spouse or brother, it changes the language. It makes it much more difficult to demonize and undercut people. Um, I do think you caught on to something. The true violence of identity is when someone identifies you, objectifies you, denies you the opportunity to express who you are. It's a presumption. It's kind of an insidious assumption we have. We see someone, we size them up, they become an object in our world, and we want them to fit into our project. And that's a violence of sorts. Whereas when somebody embraces their own, and now they expect me to like adjust my thinking and consider calling you they instead of that's such an imposition on me. People react to that in such in a way that really reveals where the oppression and the power lies.
I think
Sorry,
you're
I know that was
no,
long-winded.
no,
Yeah.
no, it's great. It's all a wonderful part of a conversation. I think that part of freedom is learning the psychology of why it's so easy for us to just judge another person off of a characteristic that they outwardly exhibit. There are scientific reasons that we categorize people as this or that, and then we make judgments. And I think there's a lot of freedom in learning the psychology of discrimination and the psychology of how schemas are developed, and that kind of that predisposition that we have, that if we let it go unchecked, we can fail to see the humanity of another person, or to give them another chance to show us something that we don't expect. Yes, I think that what you're saying about we can't isolate any one part of our marginalized identity and say that that's all that we are, because we are also belonging to families, and we belong to other communities, and there's of course the idea that all of us belong to the planet. And so um yes, thank you so much for that. Yes, we contain multitudes. We have overlapping identities that culminate in totally new and interesting ways, and we create ourselves every day. So thank you.
And we are recreated every day. Because I think that part of that we are a part of things and not the definer of. And it was interesting when you, Sean, you had said something about defining, and I wasn't sure what you were saying was killing. First, I thought you were saying freedom had that definition of, and then I was like, no, defining itself is an activity of deadening, right? Which there's a of making it a static thing, in which I think identity can be part of, except for the fact that we get to recreate them on a regular basis. Right, we get to they transform. They're a part of our social fabric as much as they are individual. And I'll refer to exploring quantum. It is both packet, particle, and wave at the same time. They're not separate. There's so much in what you are all saying, and I think my one dance with you, Joanna, in the understanding of psychology, which to me comes out of some form of supremacy. So, in itself, to be able to look at the question of how do we understand who we are in the language we create and the poetry of it, which is other than the science of it, because science is a form that has become causal, but which was not. Right? It has become an expression of how do we make this a purpose? How do we make it a point? How does it live in the productive, which is along the lines of the patriarchy, just to stay in the P's for a while. So I think that invitation to create together our relationships of what it is to be queer, what it is to be people, what it is to be human, what it is to be free, like that creative act is so important and to me philosophical, playful, um, without a point, because I will not put a period, although I might comma, so my friends and colleagues might say what they have to say.
Before Ava or Rochelle jump in, one of my one of the things that I thought about might come of this event that we're creating together is just that each of us will think about freedom, it may be in a new way or in a different way, or we will just think about it. And that is an act of liberation. And that is what was meant by the quote, "The revolution will not be televised." And what was meant by that was that the process of freedom that happens in a person's mind is private in a way, but it's not, you're not able to demonstrate that thinking that occurred in that person. And so for each of us to think just about freedom as is an act of freedom in itself, and it's also how change will take place.
What an incredible discussion. It's like I feel like I'm hanging on by a thread to these concepts. and but I really appreciated both Joanna, what you were saying, and Raquel, the idea that our first freedom is the sovereignty to consult with our own inner being as to the nature of life and our experience. And then, of course, we're in relationship to others. So, I mean, I just think about these discussions or these workshops or my groups. Like, there's all this that I get all of this from all of you. And then when I'm by myself again, or by myself, because I don't think we're ever totally alone on some level, quantum wise. So I just feel that the privilege to be able to discover what I am as a being and what I have to give, it's so wonderful. Like circling back to the previous discussion, to be able to work to set up systems where we can have that type of support and protection to be who we are, which I mean, this country is not based on that. So whatever kind of lip service and language we've used, it doesn't change the fact of the reality of what's gone on. So to discover, to have that sovereignty, that space, it's amazing. It's just amazing. And I'm just so grateful to be with you and to hear all of your input on all of this. I just feel all stirred up. And I've been thinking about this a lot anyway, I guess, in going along with the Freedom Festival. These things have been so on my mind. So, yeah. And the words we use, just snaking back to that, how important to speak accurately about what is fucking in front of us. And I think that's so important. I mean, one of the big ones for me is growing up as a woman and all the things that we have to do as women to not trigger other people, to not get men excited, to be blah, blah, this, everything. So the idea that a woman got raped is like, no, she didn't get raped. She was raped by a man. That's what happened. And to say she got raped, this is like mamby-pamby thing that puts it on her. And so that's one of those extreme examples of needing to work in our homes. And I talk to this about to my kids and to their kids and anybody's in my vicinity. I'm like speaking about such things because language, I think, is so important. I think it's wonderful that we're talking about this and thinking about it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much.
My cat has a lot of sovereignty.
Yeah.
Yes, a good teacher.
I didn't mean to interfere with your point, Ava, by posting that little chat. I think the point you're bringing up, I don't know if this is your intent or not, but that illustration of rape, describing things passively, right? In a way, that's insulting to both perpetrators and recipients of such violence. That's an act. It's not something that happens to someone. It's something someone does, right? And I think that's also true about freedom in the social sphere. And also, unfortunately, the term nonviolence, is often construed as something negative, something that we don't do, right? No, it's an active process. So passive language is often conducive to the restriction of freedom. We aren't things that things happen to. We aren't things used in this way or that way. We are active beings, and the more we acknowledge that in our language, the more likely we're going to respect people's decisions to define themselves and also ourselves to not be restricted passively by those constraints of our social systems.
That's
Yeah,
also, oh, go ahead, Rachel.
go ahead, Ava.
You know what? I forgot what it was. You go ahead.
Welcome to my world. I'll probably forget in the middle of my sentence. I'm reminded of a book called The Politics of Experience that was a while back that I experienced us having this conversation, especially when it comes to language, because the brain doesn't know the difference between a truth and a lie, a word or, a positive or negative or anything. So words are so powerful. I'm reminded of ancestors who, once they learned English, created music that were called spirituals or gospels or whatever. And the music was actually directions. The words in the music were directions during the Underground Railroad of how to leave, how to get out, how to move wherever we were going. And it was in front of everybody without people knowing that it was code. And that was a way of using language for freedom through art, through music, which is very powerful. And you mentioned Gil Scott-Heron's The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. There's lots of music out there, musicians are some of my favorite philosophers anyway, because they say through song some of the things we're talking about. And the more we play it or sing it or whatever, we're, transforming our thought patterns, our connections, our activities with people. And some of us know that we can do that intentionally. It doesn't have to be something that we aren't aware of, like conditioning or manipulation or whatever. It can be used that way and not necessarily. So I kind of lean towards a lot of music that we're talking about. That's some of it's new, some of it's not new. In fact, I don't think anything we're talking about is new, frankly, under the sun. I think, you mentioned Plato or Aristotle. I think there are people we don't even know before them that did shit. You know what I'm saying? So we're just continuing the conversation, I think, that humans have. Like, we put the comma, no period.
We put the comma and we make this available as a cultural time capsule, and for ourselves and for people we will not know it might have reached. In talking about language, I think that if you happen to speak another language, it's a very interesting way to get outside of how the words that we use can shape our reality. But I think that even within English, there are so many languages that we can use to shape our reality, music being one of them. I think math is also another valid language that's used to shape a reality that we don't often think about being in, but it is a real reality. Your cat was in a frame earlier. Bonding and communicating with an animal, that's a language of freedom that allows connection. And so I think that opening our horizons about what language means within speaking just one is also another way that we can access our freedom. Wow, what amazing, amazing stuff. Is there any last thoughts somebody needs to get in there before we wrap up this time capsule?
Wrap up. I love that. Sorry, Ava, go ahead.
I just quickly wanted to say, just this last bit, how much I appreciated these last points, the music and how music has been used by your ancestors to show the way and to provide inspiration. And that is, I mean, this is something that's still going on today where music saved my ass when I was in the doomsday cult. I started listening to songs and I'm like, oh, there's a whole reality outside of here. And it like breadcrumbed me to the outside. And just to thank all of you again, just this discussion has just filled me up to the brim. Yeah. Thank you.
Ava, I will mention that we have an active philosophy club at SRJC. If you ever want to pop in, you don't have to be enrolled. You can just come. It's like every other Friday or whatever. So, yeah.
How
Okay,
do
good.
people
Thank you.
find it? Tell us how people find it.
Oh, shoot.
Did they go to, is there a page?
They
or-
can email the chair of our department, Sarah Beth Lesson, who is on our website, SRJC Philosophy. So
Sarah.
Beth Lesson. You can just email her and say, I'd like to be added to the Philosophy Club email list.
Okay, thank you.
It goes for anybody else who watches this. Um, I love your reference to music, Rochelle. There is no liberation movement that isn't driven by music. I love this account of Cesar Chavez and just at the beginning of the United Farm Workers in their famous march to Sacramento. They're kind of lumbering along. Things are tough, and they come to some town, and there's these musicians there that end up joining them for the rest of the time. And you hear accounts of that. And virtually every single member of that march was like, it was the music kept us going. And when I think of John Coltrane, what is more free than a love supreme? Hardly anything. His way of taking standard, structured, Gershwin pieces and creating something entirely new and unparalleled. Probably it's ironic to me that probably the greatest contribution to world culture our society has to offer comes out of the strife, those spirituals, the blues and jazz. That is, in my mind, unquestionably the greatest cultural contribution to the world that the United States has offered, and it comes out of this incredibly oppressive history and people's just refusal to be defined. And back to that define. I love international films, and my etymological comments were incomplete. Maybe this will help people understand. If you watch a French film at the very end, what does it say? Define. It's a bracketing. And you watch that film over and over again, nothing changes, right? It's the same film over and over again. That's the end. And so to define is to end the conversation. Your references to commas, Rochelle and Raquel, I really
Yeah,
appreciate that. That's
that's
all I've
wonderful.
got to say. Oh, I've got a million other things to say, but I'll shut up.
Well, I wanted to offer one languaging for you in that, and I appreciate your recognizing the Black contribution to the to culture, because I think as in music, Black culture has led the innovation of music and what it is to have American music. If it's American music, it's Black music. And so it may have come along with oppression, but I think you lead it with the Black innovation, the Black leadership. And so then it leaves us not defined by the act of oppression, but by the creativity that we continue to provide as leadership.
Amazing. Wasn't that wonderful? This session, like all of our sessions, is an example of what happens when we create new experiences of freedom and independence together. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today, and to the organizers and myself, the host, for the hard work sharing this beautiful work with you. We invite you to donate to the festival so we can continue to create more free events that support people coming together to grow and play. Please check out our website for upcoming events and follow us at Freedom Festival USA on Instagram. Our next event is Freedom and Independence, Fields, Streets, and Stars. Join us in this online conversation with astrophysicist Dr. Hakeem Oluche. Hosted in conversation by Dr. Holmes, we'll explore Dr. Oluche's experience of freedom in the rural South in academia at Tougaloo College and Stanford. We'll walk through what he's learned from his communities and history that now shapes how he creates opportunities that build bridges from fields and streets to the stars. Thank you, everybody.